Okay, let's see. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. And is the sound decent? It's on my blue snowball right now.
Yeah, it's fine. Snowballs, as I recall, are very directional. I think they're very directional.
This device right here.
Yeah, those are, yeah, they face front.
Yeah.
And they have hands over their ears.
I believe they're front and actually no, the other ones are front and back, but this is just front. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a friend who has one, and he tends to use it when he's on with his spouse, and we can't hear both of them.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. Good.
Yeah, because they're sitting that far apart.
Okay. So I will have to admit, you guys got onto a tangent with various different tech things. So I sort of took the opportunity to do other things like
Like take a nap.
How did it conclude, by the way?
Sam, turn on your microphone.
Yeah, I just
how
got
it
it.
ended.
Yeah. The reason I think one of the benefits of discuss highly technical and highly scientific and cases is because it was very clear in that technical discussion, purely technical and purely operate on logic perspective, and there's no involvement in any emotion whatsoever. So, for example, when something doesn't work, you feel like, oh, damn it. That's as soon as you say damn it, that's emotion already right there. So emotion can only help when the logic is working. It's what I keep reminding everybody. You can calm your emotion like stepping on the gas after you get your steering straight. But not before.
Emotions arise in politics. They don't arise in deep grokking of technology, mathematics, and science. It's just, you just grind at it until you figure it out. Politics, you never figure it out, and you just go haywire in your head with it.
Yeah, it's like playing golf, right? The more you can get your logic and your physics and your direction and your swing all right, then everything will be. So when we have a discussion on technical, it's purely presenting the case of how do we solve problem with pure logics.
Dealing with people who have serious mental disorders, which almost everybody has to do at least once in their life, if not multiple times, just there's no solution. I mean, theoretically, there might be a solution, but people basically suffer with bad relationships if they can't figure out the other person, and there's no logic involved. It's just
and the way that I present that is to, how do you tell a drunk person that he's drunk or she's drunk? How do you tell a stupid person they're stupid? It's like, I can't help you. I'm sorry.
How do you tell an oblivious person they're oblivious?
Yeah, exactly right.
And people are very oblivious, and I'm sure that I'm oblivious on lots of topics.
Yeah. And related to that, how do you tell a smart person they're an idiot?
Well, you basically ask them a question that they can't answer without trolling, without asking a how do you define an unanswerable question?
Right.
So if they're really smart, they'll say mu.
Right. I want to talk about something that
you
posted, Barry, in on Facebook, number 3. So I cannot understand them, that kind of question.
Right. I can't construct a hypothetical mental model of their frame of mind. Their frame of mind is so foreign and alien to me that I haven't got a clue what the hell's going on in their head.
Right. And I've been thinking about that the last hour while I was taking a shower and get myself ready, right? So the best thing I can tell you is a couple of things. There are 3 factors that affect you. Number 1, you don't really have a compelling reason why you want to understand them. And that's number 1, because that's 80% of the energy right there. So for example, you are helping your neighbors putting a Ring camera on, right? You did understand her needs. You did understand her. You did understand the technical issue because you have a compelling reason that you want to help her so that she have a Ring doorbell camera for her safety, whatever the reason is. So the compelling reason is there. So once you have a compelling reason, now you go into the understanding part of it. So I'm just saying that the big part of understanding somebody is not so much about understanding, it's about that you have a compelling reason to help, compelling reason to execute the understanding part of it.
care.
The compelling reason is that I happen to know how to do it, and she didn't, and it wasn't that big a job, although it did take about a day.
But you
Yeah, but-
understand her needs.
That's right.
Yeah, her needs were obvious. She bought a doorbell and had no idea how to install it.
But the
That's-
guy, but there are people that you don't have a competitor understand. You walk away from that opportunity to understand them. Is my point.
Yes, and I have such a person, not a neighbor. She lives a few miles from here, and I met her in Toastmasters, and she's alienated from every member of her nuclear family. She's alienated from her ex-husband, and she considers herself a life coach. That's her profession, self-employed, and she can't fix anything in her house. And I was sent over by a mutual friend to help her fix things. I ended up with a ton of stuff for her she wanted me to fix, but she's also very manipulative. And she has very different philosophy and very different practices. And basically I have nothing in she's very transactional. I have nothing in common with her.
Yeah.
So she posted on LinkedIn a blog post that it turned out she wrote, but I didn't know it because she didn't have her name at the top. I had her name way down at the bottom. So I read this blog post, which was about why it's so hard to deal with political animals, which I didn't disagree with. But what I added was a comment on why it's so hard to deal with political animals. Whereas her thing is, I will teach you how to deal with political animals. And I pointed out, sort of the root cause. And she took umbrage, serious umbrage, that I had posted this disparagement of politics. And we had a falling out. That was back in January. And finally I said, let's go our separate ways. We have dissimilar philosophies, dissimilar beliefs, dissimilar practices, and we're not going to agree on this. Let's not argue about it. Let's just go our separate ways. So 6 months later, her dishwasher breaks down. And she has no idea how to fix it. So out of the blue, I get, let's have a conversation, she says, or something to that effect. I said, did you want to patch up our disagreement from last January? She says, yeah. I'm thinking, why does she want to patch up our disagreement? It's insoluble. We have irreconcilable differences. Why does she want? Turned out she wanted me to fix her dishwasher. She didn't say that though, but I determined that there was probably an ulterior motive.
Well, Barry, now that
later,
we're friends again.
No, a month later. So I simply said, no, let's forget about it. Let's just go our separate ways. A month later, she posts on Facebook how after a month, she figured out how to get her dishwasher fixed for $130. And I go, aha, there's the evidence that my suspicion was right. She had an ulterior motive.
Now, would you conclude that you don't understand her? My judgment would be you do understand her.
Well, so then I went back just this morning, in fact, and I found a post of hers from, I think, 2 years ago, where she had shown a whole bunch of messages between her and her nuclear family members, mainly her brothers, and maybe her mother. And it was revealed that she was alienated from all of her family members and that they had disconnected from her.
Yeah.
And she thought that was unjust and unfair. And she had no clue why the disconnect. And I'm going, oh, she comes to me because I'm going to play the role of her ex-husband, who was a fix-it man. I'm going to play the role of her brothers, who were engineers and could fix things for her. And no, I'm not going to play that role. I'm not going to get back into that same, bad relationship where a friend in need is a friend for a minute. It's all transactional.
But the trouble is that as soon as you make out the decision, you now have she has a compelling reason to know you, to understand you.
Yes.
You don't have a reason to see. This is what I keep saying about it. Understanding each other, you must have a compelling reason. That's 80% of the way.
I have no compelling reason to be her zero charge fix-it guy for dozens and dozens of broken things in her house that she has no idea how to fix.
Yeah.
And she just wants somebody who can come and fix things and not charge her any money for it.
Yeah.
And she can be very manipulative about, trying to get, recruit, schmageggies like me to come and schmendricks like me to come and fix it for her. I did
Believe it or not,
when you were a
believe
kid.
it or not, believe it or not, this is the way that you, when you deal with a toddler that wants something really bad, you have to figure out what they want, what the comparison they have to have that thing. Once you have it, then you got something to work to leverage with. So
The
again,
only
it's
thing
in
she
this-
ever needed me for was to fix stuff in her house, ever.
I'm saying that the same structure is the same thing for educating a young children when they're throwing a tantrum. You need to find out exactly what they want so badly. With they have a compelling reason for wanting something, and the same structure, whether they're young or they're old or old lady or alienated from brother or whatever, it makes no difference.
And she makes her money by being a life coach about how to survive in a world full of really annoying politics. And the fact
Because
that
because she's an expert in it, she can alienate and then still be able to get away with it.
yeah, well, in my case, she didn't succeed.
Well, you are only one of the exceptions, so that doesn't count.
And her brothers and her mother and her ex-husband, all people who actually know how to understand complicated systems and fix them.
Right,
And the only thing, she doesn't understand politics, but she knows how to coach people.
right.
She's selling snake oil. And my snake oil is run the other way as fast as you can. Just get the hell out of the world of politics. It'll drive you crazy, and go do something useful like fixing technology.
Yep. So again, I'm just trying to make you correction about, I don't understand people. It's like you don't have a comparison to understand people yet. Once you have it, then you will have the increase the rate of success of understanding people.
Well, you can understand, for example, I can understand the piece of technology is broken, that there's
Right.
some component that's just dead.
Right.
And in some cases, I might be able to do neurosurgery on the motherboard and replace a capacitor.
Okay.
If a chip is burned out and it's proprietary chip that's surface mounted forget it.
Yeah,
It's-
of
I
course.
can say this is broken. It's beyond my ken. I can't bring it back to life.
Yeah. Beyond
It's
your
not-
capability. Yeah.
Frankenstein's monster. I can I can resurrect some cadavers, some old machines I can resurrect, and lots of them I can't because they're just too far gone. They're rusted out.
So how about another case of you don't understand the person?
So the one that I don't understand is the one that I just mentioned. I understand the diagnosis that a psychologist gave me of a person that I had a really bad relationship with 40 years ago.
Okay.
He diagnosed her as borderline personality disorder, which I then had to look up and find out what that really meant. But the important thing he told me, he said, "Barry, you were lucky to get out alive."
Oh,
And I got out. I survived and I got out. And I can't say I never looked back because it's not like I can forget about it.
So
But-
someone helped you to understand her.
I went to a psychologist and I said,
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at solving problems. I said, this one is beyond my ken. I have no idea how to relate to this person.
So this is how I classify it. You understand her enough that you need help to get someone else to give you a professional understanding of
Right.
her so that you can get out alive.
And it turns out that I'm allergic to people with axis 2 cluster B personality disorders.
What does that
which is
mean?
Something like, I don't know, 15, 20%, they say. And when somebody like that comes along, I get sort of a gut feeling that this is not going to work, but I can't articulate other than saying I got spilkus in my genecticus. Okay, I got butterflies in my stomach. And it turns out that that's the first warning sign that the person I'm relating to is suffering from some axis 2 cluster B. And by the way, the poster child for axis 2 cluster B is Donald Trump. He's the most prominent person with a whole constellation of those kinds of disorders.
What's the difference that make the difference?
Well, for one thing, the main thing is the profound absence of accurate model-based reasoning.
Okay.
And in the case of that person, I don't have a model of them, and they don't have a model of reality.
That's your assessment.
Yeah, it's like Chris Christie says of Ramaswamy, he's a walking, talking chat GPT. I don't know if you saw that. He characterized that one newcomer as ChatGPT, because he can talk, but he's just reciting stuff the way ChatGPT would recite stuff. It sounds normal, but there's no insight there. It's just Memorex, or sort of pseudo Memorex. And Ramaswamy is the one who says, you know, he would pardon Trump if he got elected on the first day of office. That's one of the things he said in that debate. If I'm elected, the very first thing I'll do on day one is I'll pardon all those people who got indicted with Trump, including Trump.
On what basis?
On the basis that he's the president and he has the power to do it.
Yeah.
But why?
Because he doesn't think they did anything wrong. He's not aware of anything that compels them to be indicted or tried or convicted or punished.
And he doesn't understand the Constitution then.
You could say it that way. I don't know what he understands because I don't have a mental model of Ramaswamy. And the one thing that's kind of funny is I don't know if it's any of the other Republicans, but a lot of people are nicknaming him Ramasmarmy. And it occurs to me that giving people pejorative nicknames, that's what Trump does. Trump is gifted at anointing everybody with a pejorative nickname, and the people who call him Ramasmarmy are basically emulating Trump's tactic.
I've heard some reports say that he, quote unquote, outshone the others or won the debate. I'm curious.
Yeah, no, he was a standout because he was so different. He was so different from the others that he stood out as the one that was most interesting to listen to because he was so outrageous.
I wasn't.
He talked about global warming, global weather. You know, nobody else is there. Yeah.
But he's a newcomer. He's rich. He's a newcomer, and he has no experience in politics. And he comes out and says, "I'm the only one who's a big fan of Trump, and I would pardon him if I got elected." That means that most likely his frame of mind is compatible with the frame of mind of people who have access to cluster B personality disorders, narcissism, Machiavellianism. I can't remember them, list them all off now. The dark tetrad.
That's only one of the perspective. You know, if you look at it from the rate of success perspective, it's like, if I pardon the one that can give me the most vote, then please vote me in so that I can do that for you. You know, it's like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, that's the strategy. So it's
look at the Wagner Group. All the newcomers in Wagner Group are people who were brought out of jail. They were convicted criminals who were let out of jail to become mercenaries in the Wagner army. And the old timers were the two guys who got killed in the plane crash. The old guard the two top guys, the old guard got killed. And the young people, the newcomers, are the criminals who were paid to be fighters.
Again, so look at the situation. The structure is, you need a guy, you need some tough guy that can carry machine gun and not worry about killing people. Where the hell are you going to find it in your country? You know, so you have to look at the trash can, you have to look at the trash can, you look at the prison, you can look at the prison. I don't care.
Yeah. They were cannon fodder. And the other funny thing, I may have mentioned this yesterday. You can stop me if I'm repeating myself. I think I told you yesterday about the former governor of Georgia, Lester Maddox, about 30, 40 years ago. And he was criticized because of the terrible conditions of Georgia's jails, which is true today.
Yesterday,
and he famously responded, "Things are not going to improve in Georgia's jails until we get a better class of prisoners." Well, they're maybe going to get some white collar prisoners, depending on the outcome of this 19 indicted people. Maybe Lester Maddox will be vindicated.
Well, the thing is, 19 compared to what's the population of the prison right now? So what, 3,000?
Yeah, the Fulton County Jail, I think, has 3,000 people, and it was built for like 1,000, 1,200.
Yeah.
And the conditions are objectively horrible there.
But the thing is, all you need is one person that the Fed to come in and clean it out. You don't need
Right.
the 19, just need one of them that triggers that cleanup.
If any one of them is consigned to the Fulton County Jail, you can bet that the feds will rapidly finish their investigation of the terrible conditions in Georgia's jails, of which Fulton County is one example.
Because
Yeah,
that's a
woman who
compelling
died.
reason. Because there's a compelling reason for the Fed to do that, right?
Yeah, there was a woman who died in that jail, and I think she was in a cell with bed bugs and other stuff, and she got infected by either bed bugs or some vermin and died. And that was what triggered the feds to start looking at the terrible conditions, because it's one thing to incarcerate people, another one to put them into a place where they're going to get infected and die, you know, from vermin and disease that are inhabiting the jail. So it's a certain kind of irony. It's a humorous irony that Lester Maddox's suggestion is coming true. By the way, somebody wrote a play that was performed on Broadway about Lester Maddox, and the character who played Lester Maddox played him in a very clown-like portrayal. And if you go back and try to find the research, you can probably find the Broadway play that was a parody of Lester Maddox, the governor of Georgia, some 30, 40 years ago.
Since you guys are helping me get caught up on news, what's the latest? I heard a rumor that some of the remaining surviving Wagner guys are going after Putin. Is that something
I
that
hadn't heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me, because today I heard a headline, I didn't see the evidence, that they have confirmed that the two Wagner guys were really on that plane and really did die.
not only that, but that it didn't look like an accident?
So that means that the evidence didn't come from the Kremlin.
Yeah.
Where did the evidence come from?
What does the accident mean, really? It's like somebody put a bomb in the. Definitely, there's
That's
a
what they
bomb in the
suspect.
plane. No question
The
whatsoever.
bomb,
You
or they
call it
shot it
accident?
down. There's a video. Somebody just happenstantially caught a video of the
crash.
plane falling out of the sky, and I'm sure that the forensic experts will study the hell out of that video and determine whether it was hit or whether it blew up from the inside.
It was straight down because the wind fell apart.
Very likely that was a bomb.
Yeah.
But I mean, what am I? I'm not a forensic expert on, you know, Pan Am, what was it? Pan Am 103, was that the one that blew up over Lockerbie? And that was in the suitcase. It took them years to do the forensic analysis on the Lockerbie, Scotland one. There was some device in some suitcase in the compartment that was set to go off either on time or on altitude or something.
Right.
And they took them forever to get the evidence. And then I think they even found who did it, if I'm not mistaken. But it took decades to solve that one with very technical forensic analysis. Was that Gail that was in your background there for a second?
Yeah, she's rummaging through my chocolate.
Oh, I made a mistake the other day. I took a piece of chocolate, you know, individually wrapped, and I put them in my pocket, not thinking that
It'll melt.
They did. They melted. And I looked down, and there's this brown spot on my pocket. And I go, "Am I bleeding?" Oh, that's the chocolate.
Well, I am. I go to these Alaska lounges, and on the door, heading out of the lounge, there's always this nice big jar of chocolate. So I usually get it for friends and colleagues and whatever. And occasionally I bring some home.
Yeah, but you don't put them in your pocket.
No, I did that until I learned the lesson that you learned.
Yeah, well, I did it this one time. The Fix-It shop, somebody had brought in as a gift a bag of, I can't remember the brand name, those little funky but nice chocolates. There were 2 left in the bag, and I put them in my pocket and didn't think twice that they were going to melt and spill.
If you go to SFO on the way out in those little airport shops, there's always these shops that sell Ghirardelli chocolates, right? In my very first trip to India, somebody told me the India people, the colleagues, really love Ghirardelli chocolates. So I took like 3 huge bags of Ghirardelli chocolates because it's a very large team. That was actually very well received. So that was actually a very good recommendation. So now I travel with chocolates and give them to colleagues, knowing
Yeah.
that it's a health issue, but people still like it.
When I went to Geneva for CCITT meetings, I would, because the CCITT is actually part of the United Nations, sort of under their umbrella. You can go to the shop, that's the United Nations shop, and you basically get things below cost. And I bought all the Swiss chocolate candy bars that I could get in my suitcase, and they lasted about a year. And no problem bringing them back. They didn't complain that I brought back too much chocolate from Switzerland.
The one time I was able to find myself in Switzerland was 1991. I spent just like 1 or 2 days in Geneva and near the lake. What was that famous lake there? Anyway,
Lake Lemon.
yeah, right. Okay. So I did experience that, these beautiful little outdoor cafes, you could get coffee and chocolates and baked goods or whatever. Really fancy, really good, really exquisitely made, and nicely expensive. Okay. So I'm glad I only had like a day there in Switzerland. Very, very expensive.
You see the shops that were selling croque monsieur and croque madame? It's a kind of a sandwich. And croque monsieur is, the man's sandwich, and croque madame is the woman's sandwich. And they're named that way because there's a sexual context to how they got named. Because it's a pun. And I remember seeing these signs so that we sell croque monsieur, croque madame. And when I got home, I looked up, first of all, I didn't know what it was. It was some kind of a snack, but they had kind of a cutesy sexual connotation to their naming. Do you know the word CROQUE as a French word? Do you know what it means? I don't either. This is like 30 years ago. But I had a laugh when I found out how they got their name.
Sam, do you know? No, I don't know. So, anybody else want to check in?
I bet Joshua knows French. He knows everything.
He's
Hey,
busy.
Barry.
Yeah.
One of the things that I read probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, because it's been on my my list of things to talk about, but I don't like to interject when you guys have some momentum. But if there is a reference, you had actually posted something regarding vision. And that to me,
Image.
no, regarding vision, as in having a vision.
Oh, but not image.
No, it wasn't about image.
Okay.
So I wrote down 3 little notes for myself. Okay. And there are 3 different notions of vision. And I don't know, but I suspect I know which notion you were talking about. But I wanted to put all 3 on the table. Okay.
Okay. You have to remind me because I can't remember posting about the word vision.
Okay.
Distinct image.
Yeah, I didn't save the reference. All I did was write down these notes about vision.
Okay.
So it says one
it's not
sense
like
of vision, which is the ability to see what's around me. That's number 1.
Yeah.
The second notion of vision is, for me, the ability to see where I'm going.
Yes. What's over the horizon?
Which is related to the other, is the ability to see where I could go.
Yeah. Over the horizon.
So, for me, that corresponds, the first one corresponds to awareness.
Yep.
The second corresponds to understanding reality, whatever you call a reality. And the third actually corresponds to creating possibilities.
Yeah, imagination.
Yeah.
Really
I think
imagination.
all 3 notions of vision are very important.
They are.
I think they all need to work together.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd just throw that on there because that's what's stimulated when you actually wrote that little reference to vision. I'm presuming it was you. I thought it was you because I know that I wanted to bring it up in this forum.
It might be, but I just don't remember writing about vision, but I write about so many things.
Because a lot of people talk about
go I was going to say an example of the first one, seeing what's around you, is when Fred brings in his tripod for his webcam, and his tripod is a Sony branded tripod. And the handle on it isn't just a handle, it's actually a remote control that you plug in to the camera. And after I realized that it was a Sony branded tripod with a remote control for some original camera, I said, Fred, do you have the original camera that this tripod goes to?
I remember you talked about that story yesterday.
Yeah. And I said, that's what you wanted in the first place. You wanted a really nice camera that had an optical zoom. Do you still have the He says, yeah, I still have it. I just don't use it anymore. I said, but that's what you wanted, a camera with a zoom. He brings it in, and yesterday I got it working. It had an
What vision were you referring to regarding this story?
Because I saw written on the tripod the name Sony, and it was a Sony branded tripod. And I saw that it had this remote control on the handle. So I observed that, because it wasn't just a random tripod, it was a tripod with a certain designation on it. And then I imagined that he probably had the camera that went with it.
I'm trying to figure out which notion of vision does this anecdote refer to?
Awareness, possibility, imagination.
Okay.
Because I hadn't noticed that the camera was that the tripod was a Sony tripod. Just didn't pay attention to that. Even though it was visible, I simply, it's a tripod. It's an old tripod. No, it's more than an old tripod. It's a tripod that goes with a really nice Sony camera, specially designed to go with it. And does he still own it?
I get the reference. Good, thank you. So my follow-up question to this is, are there other notions of vision? I mean, I just see these three. I don't see them as exclusive at all. But
yeah. Well, imagination, as in sci-fi, where a sci-fi writer will imagine something in the future that doesn't exist. And so like this week, can I get this? This week, I'm going to talk about some of the predictions that's in 2001: A Space Odyssey, the movie and the story that Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke wrote back in 1964 or 67, whatever. And which of the things that they put into that story were prescient, that the technology did come to exist, what things that they put in that didn't come to exist, and what interesting things that came to exist aren't even conceived of when the movie came out. And so it just is a pivot about how prescient are sci-fi writers or fantasy writers imagining things that might happen in the future.
So isn't that number three, the ability to see where we could go?
Yes.
The possibilities?
Possibilities which may or may not be feasible, scientifically feasible, imaginable. For example, time travel is one that, except that you want to go forward in time with the rate of 1 second per second, going backwards in time, as far as we know, is a fantasy. Today. Wormholes are probably a fantasy. There's going someplace instantly through a wormhole. Other things, and I thought the one thing that was only slightly hinted at in 2001: A Space Odyssey is machine learning. Machines becoming not just sentient, but able to construct knowledge like a PhD would construct knowledge that never existed before. So that was sort of the notion of how much prescience or vision or imagination do fiction writers have.
So this could be a huge area of discussion, because that basically is the core of science fiction, is to ask what if.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental question behind science fiction.
Is there intelligent life out there in the galaxy that
That's one of many questions the science fiction can ask.
Exactly.
So
voice to the bottom of the
since I was a kid. That's why it's always, been core to my reading set.
The first nuclear submarine was called Nautilus. Why was it called Nautilus? Because that's what was in the book that remind me who was the author of that.
Okay, so my question is, other than these three, the ability to see what's around me, the ability to see where I am, the ability to see, where I could go, corresponding to awareness, understanding, and possibilities, are there other notions of vision that apply that I've not yet included in this discussion?
Well, I would say adaptation to use as a tool something that was not intended for that use.
Is that vision?
That's recognizing the existence of something that's banal and saying this can be used in an innovative way to do something I really need to do, but I wouldn't have bought that item to do it. I can just adapt it.
So you would include that in the notion of vision.
Yeah. In fact, where it came to mind is, if you remember one of the very first computer adventure games, the game called Adventure or Colossal Cave from the 1970s. In that game, there are all kinds of pieces of junk in the cave. And some of them are tools that you have to use to solve the puzzles.
There's a treasure chest. There are pathways leading north and south and west.
Right.
There's an axe. There's a pick. There's a net. There are 6 golden coins.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The key thing is that there are some artifacts which appear to be junk, but aren't. They are cleverly adaptable for a purpose other than what their normal role.
So my question is, would that be part of number 3, the creation of possibilities, or would you include that as a first-class notion of vision?
Well, I was, first of all, to notice that something exists that you would normally ignore. Something that would normally be thought of.
That's number 1. That's number 1.
So the thing which is, quote, noise, background noise, isn't background noise, it's signal. And it has a possibility of being adapted for a useful function that wasn't invented to perform.
I'm trying to flesh out my notion, like my notion of vision. So I'm trying to figure out, where it could be extended and what needs to reject, what needs to be included. So I understand this notion, because to me, vision is where everything else could derive. Okay.
I mean, theory construction, I consider theory construction an instance of vision. How can I envision a mathematical model that captures the essence of the dynamic behavior of some phenomenon?
So I would argue maybe that's 2, the ability to actually understand reality. Wouldn't that be the model-based reasoning is one way to understand reality.
And to map it into a language, a public language, namely mathematics, technically a public language that captures the essence. As opposed to a narrative.
I know that Barry and I have been going on about this, but you've probably got a lot of thoughts in your head.
So I look at the three that you were talking about, the ability to see what could be. Based on what I hear so far, it's not really that. It's not a really vision. It's basically more like a logical deduction. I have this, so I can do that. I have a nail, I have a hammer, I know what to do with it. So it's like I can put the nail into whatever. So it's a logical deduction. It's nothing to do with vision at all. Vision typically has something to do with, think of it this way, like, think of it like I have faith, a leap of faith. Think of like I'm in pain. I want to get away from, I have a motivation to, I want to have the world without what do you call that, global warming problem. We want the world peace, that a vision usually is something to do, you get the hell out of the pain you have. Usually that's what, or something better than what it is. So people think of better, it's actually get out of pain. I call that away from motivation. That's a comparison. So typically it's like a company. My vision is to have everybody work from home and enjoy life and whatever that is. So ideal scenario is like a Buddhist vision is like going to Nevada. So that like a vision. So like a better conditions than whatever it is right now, the hell I'm in right now. Typically that's what mostly profitable, friendly environment. That's kind of, again, I'm talking about in the general public sense. I'm not talking about scientific, Barry's not wrong. It's just that it's only one small part of the vision.
Here's another example. There's a brand of chewing gum called Chiclets. And Chiclets is called Chiclets because chicle is the name of some kind of a naturally occurring gum-like substance that grows in, I think, the Amazon. And they discovered that you can chew this naturally produced gum, and it's pleasurable to chew. And a guy named Wrigley decided to turn that into a product. And now there's Wrigley Field in Chicago, and it's all because somebody down in the Amazon found this chicle that you can chew.
So the question is that a vision? This is what Sam wanted to know, right? So from my perspective is that, so I have this thing that naturally happened in Amazon. I can chew on it. So now because of it, again, I'm kind of calling that logical deductions. Like logically, I'm going to be able, what can I go to do with it so that I can make a lot of money? So like, okay, so logically I can do it. So that's one small part of the vision. Okay. Another vision would be that before he went to Amazon or before he know about Amazon, it's like, I have a vision. I married this beautiful girl. I'm going to make some kids. I'm going to have a wonderful family. I need a business to sustain it. I want the people how do I serve it? Like, again, out of no evidence. This is what I call leap of faith.
Yeah.
See,
So vision, if you want to say that, in the most part, is leap of faith, and is to get the hell out of this bad condition. I mean, I want to have better conditions. Again, that would be the major category of it.
okay, so thanks for providing that, because to me that is integral to what I was calling number 3 aspect of vision, which is, if we say I want this nirvana, you call it, okay, this perfect view, this utopia, this married state of bliss or whatever it is.
Okay, let me interrupt you real quick. What did Kennedy say about the going to the moon?
In this decade and other things.
1968, we're going to do it.
No. Listen, pay attention. I'm going to give you a couple more try. What did Kennedy say about going to the moon?
So we're going to do it.
No, we do it because we can.
Actually, when he said that, which is I think 62,
Yeah,
know that we could. He believed that we could.
it's not about belief. He said we want to do it because we could.
Yeah.
If you look at it very carefully, because we could, and that's a really important, what I call taking a stand. I'm taking a stand that as a nation of the most powerful country in the world, we could do it. And why we want to do it? Because we could. And to me, that's a vision.
He didn't know that we could do it within the decade. He asserted that.
Yeah.
It's quite possible that it would have taken
timeline is not important. Timeline is not important to him when he said that. The important thing is that he take a stand that as a leader of this country, we could do it, and that's why we're doing it.
It's not that hard to imagine that space travel, because we already had rockets.
But there was no evidence. Remember, there was no evidence that we could do it. He just said because he'd have take a leap of faith and take a stand on that. Again, that's why
we knew that we could shoot rockets to the top of the atmosphere. When did we put up the first satellites? That was 57, right? Didn't Sputnik go up in 50? So we already knew in 57 that we could shoot a little thing the size of a basketball into Earth orbit. And once you can prove that you can shoot a rocket into orbit, then it's not that hard to imagine that you can make a bigger rocket and shoot.
Remember, he's not a scientist, so he doesn't have the ability to extrapolate. Is what I'm saying.
He probably didn't write that passage.
Again, I don't know. All I can say that when he delivered that, when I hear that message, I do it because I could, not because I extrapolate that. If I extrapolate, I had a staircase, I can walk up to the stairs. No, I could jump from first floor to the second floor without the help of staircase. That's a vision.
Yeah, and now we have backpacks that will do that. We have these rocket backpacks that
jetpack,
jetpack that you can jump to the top of the stairs,
but not to the moon. Yeah, not the moon yet.
Yeah. So Sam's going to
help Sam.
I think I did not have this notion of logical deductive reasoning in my number 3 notion of vision. My number 3,
it is obvious. It is what it is. The way that you gave several example is always the case. That's a pattern. I'm recognizing it.
It might be abductive reasoning. You know about abductive reasoning versus deductive, there's inductive, deductive, and abductive.
Okay, explain it.
So I think you probably already know what inductive reasoning is. Abductive is the one that's least commonly discussed, and that's imagining something beyond what is deducible or provable by induction. Abductive is sort of guessing and asserting something is possible without a shred of evidence or a shred of deductive or inductive reasoning that confirms that it's doable. It's not, you can't predict it. Say what?
Is it really reasoning then?
Well, it's called abductive reasoning in philosophy. If you take a course in philosophy and you study the named methods of reasoning, abductive reasoning is a named method, but it's imaginative. By analogy or metaphor or some process other than rigorous deduction or mathematical induction. It's envisioning something that's not inconceivable.
Sure. And I think that's how hypothesis gets created. But
Exactly.
hypothesis needs to be tested in order to ascertain its truthiness.
Exactly.
Unlike deductive or inferential, which actually carry through truthiness if you follow the process correctly.
Right.
In abductive, you have to then say, okay, this is what I could believe, and then I have to figure out whether I should believe it.
Yeah.
A hypothesis, remember, hypothesis doesn't come out from the thin air.
No,
Of course not.
you make a guess.
Yeah, you make a guess based on some facts that you know already, is my point. There is something for you to jump off from.
A good example is they knew that if you look in a cell, you can see something called you can see something called genetic material.
Okay.
But they didn't know the structure, the atomic or molecular structure of this genetic material. They were called chromosomes because if you stain them, they turn colors. That's how they got their name. Colored bodies, because you could put a stain in, they would turn a color. And there was a race to figure out what are chromosomes made out of. Linus Pauling, who was a chemist, imagined it was a helix, but he imagined it was a single helix, an alpha helix. And he was trying to get evidence to confirm it's an alpha helix. Turned out to be a double helix, two strands wound around each other with the bridges across it. So he was half right. It's a helix. There's a long coil, but he had the architecture guessed wrong. Turned out to be a double. That could have been. It turns out you can buy toys where you can make alpha helixes, double, triple helix. And I used to make in the discovery room with this toy called Marble Works a 4 helix.
Wow.
I could build a thing where you could have 4 coils and you could drop a marble in any one of 4 spots, and each marble would go down one of the raceways, and there were 4 raceways to the bottom. It came out. There were 4 bases. This is the interesting part. The base of the helix was 4 bases because they were standing on the piece of the bottom of the tower. And I said, here's a helix on 4 bases, but it's a quadruple helix, so you can drop 4 different colored marbles down it. And that was sort of illustrating the geometry. So you can imagine an alpha helix, like a kid slide, spiral slide, or a spiral staircase, which are commonplace, and then the double, triple, and quadruple. And then I said, you can make an n+1 helix out of n bases, or something to that effect. Wow. The theorem that how many raceways would it take as a function of the number of bases it's standing on? And it was like an n and n+1 mathematical relationship that you could build these things out of if you had enough parts.
So this to me is an interesting digression that I'm about to take. So I apologize in advance, okay? But in this notion of participatory evolution or intentional evolution or eliminating random chance, we understand life in terms of a double helix containing all the information about how proteins get created, right?
Right.
No, I was wondering, in all of the so-called EBEs, you guys know what EBE stands for?
What are the letters again?
EB, epsilon, beta, epsilon.
No, I don't know that.
This just recently came to my attention because, you know, the declassification of some of these secret files regarding UFOs.
Mm.
EBE refers to extraterrestrial biological entity.
Mm.
Okay.
So there's a classification of them, whether they are alive or whether they're dead. Okay.
Yep.
So somewhere at Wright-Patt Air Force Base or Area 51, you know, Section 4 or whatever, there are these secret vaults that have alien corpses or alien body parts. Okay. And what I was really curious about is, do they still have a double helix structure? Or is there any reason to believe that, you know, there are beings out there that have a triple helix or maybe an entirely different informational encoding structure?
Exactly.
And then the attendant question beyond that is, if we were to be intentionally evolving our species beyond where we are today, must we stay within a double helix structure, or is there a way to expand beyond that in a way that's, of course, now then will be incompatible with life as we know it? So,
You know about transhumanism, don't you?
of course, right? So I'm still asking that question based on some of the new quote unquote unclassified, declassified, materials, which I haven't studied in detail yet. Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm just asking that question about how we potentially could evolve. Okay, so this is the part C. This is the 3 of vision. Okay, the possibility that there be a non-double helix life form that could actually be, more quote unquote advanced in some notion than what we currently represent. Over.
Absolutely. I mean, here we are sitting in front of physical computers that are physically separate from our body. But I can imagine in 30 years that they will implant a chip in your brain that's the whole computer that will generate signals to your visual cortex and signals, to your audio cortex, and basically we'll have Zoom literally implanted, in our skull as a device that does Wi-Fi or, whatever, and it'll become a hybrid biological, technological entity, and we wouldn't be able to survive without the technology implanted in our physical bodies. Just like this is not quite physically. I mean, people do have things implanted in their eyeball. They do have cochlear implants. They do have heart pacemakers. And this computer that's sitting in front of me could within, a few decades be implanted, somewhere inside of my skull.
But that doesn't actually affect whether we're still double helix or triple helix, right? That's an entirely separate dimension.
We're talking about hybrid.
Right.
Yeah.
And that has been asked. That what if has been asked. Certainly in the Matrix, it's been asked, and other stories way before that. Okay.
We also have gut bacteria. We have gut bacteria, which we have to live. And the gut bacteria happens to be earth-based, so it's double helix bacteria. But you could have gut bacteria or other things in your system that aren't double helix.
No, but I'm really asking a question of geometrically, spatially, mathematically, is it possible? In fact, even with the bond structures and bond strengths required to create triple helix and quadruple helix, would it be even in the realm of possibility that those structures unwind and create proteins? Or is it so unlikely because of the complexity of triple and quadruple helix that we are now restricted to a double helix life form?
I don't think so. I think it's possible to envision and maybe even construct other geometries besides the double helix. But the fact that nature came up with the double helix probably means it's the easiest one that works.
Sure, you could potentially say, yeah, it's more likely to work in the double helix, and if it does, you don't have to go and try the triple helix.
Because it's harder to make one.
Yeah. You don't need the energy expenditure in order to do that.
Right.
Right.
But you can, out of that marble works, I could build an N helix for arbitrary N on, I think, N+1 bases, or however. I worked out the math. If I had enough parts, I can make an N helix for any N.
The question would be, what would be their folding characteristics? Could you actually fold them compactly? Or would it not be as flexible? Would it be more rigid?
All of the double helix does is encodes a sequence of codons. So the question is, how can I get a sequence of codons? There are 64 codons that can exist. We only use about, 20 of them or something. But you can have 64 codons, which can then be your language, your for coding anything. So if I wanted to code up JavaScript, what does it take to have an ASCII alphabet? 256 symbols, but we began with 32 symbols or 36 symbols in the early days of computers. So, and 32. We have 21 amino acids or 22 amino acids and potentially 64 codons, of which we only use about 20 or 30. So anything that can encode in some alphabet enough. How many instructions do you need for a reduced instruction set computer? You probably know this better than I do. If it's fewer than 64 basic instructions in a RISC CPU.
ARM specification.
What is ARM? Do you know how many basic machine language instructions are in an ARM chip?
I don't know.
I'm going to guess less than 64, probably. And by going to a reduced instruction set instead of hundreds or 128 or whatever they had in the early IBM or Motorola chips, they were able to make a faster machine that was easier to manage. But they had to be better, clever. They had to be more clever. Like you can make a logic circuit out of what is it, a NAND gate and an OR gate. That's all you need. You only need 3 gates, right? Or 2 or 3 gates, and you can make anything.
Yeah.
And the idea was, what's the minimum number of atomic units from which you can make an arbitrary computing machine?
I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. I said, due to the randomness of the Big Bang or whatever you call that, nature had tried all that double helix, triple helix, quadruple helix, and n+1 helix and all that stuff, and none of those survived except what we have today.
Yeah,
that we know.
There was PNA
on this planet.
Again, I'm just telling you perspective. Okay, this perspective. Okay, I don't know what the other. Maybe there's another, we talk about Goldilocks, right? So like another planet may have a different condition than the triple helix may survive. But in this planet, at this moment, right now, that we are aware of, and one more perspective I want to throw that into this here is that I want everybody to remember that we're all energy. If you lose an electron microscope, look at all our double helix, it's not double helix, it's all energy.
If you look at nucleosynthesis in the sun, and any star, not just our sun, hydrogen, helium, carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, I think, are the first ones that you get.
Yeah.
So if you can get carbon, carbon's crucial for hydrogen fusion, you have to have a carbon cycle, because the carbon is the substrate. It's the tabletop of which you do the others. And you can skip the carbon step, but it's much harder. So the fact that the sun makes carbon and then uses the carbon to make helium, to make energy, and also ends up making oxygen and nitrogen at the same time, that's the basis for which nature, those are the building blocks that nature had to work with. Silicon came later. You had to have a thermonuclear explosion of some kind, a nova or supernova, to make the heavier elements. So nature did what made it out of what it had available. Now the Earth is tons of silicon dioxide in the Earth, so we made technology out of silicon and germanium, but mainly silicon because it's very plentiful.
Yeah, the thing of it's interesting to hear you say, Barry, that it's like nature have to work with. So I think of nature as an invisible force, like God or source or whatever, trying to make this happen. For me, it's just naturally happening.
Yeah. That's what the word nature means. It's just happening without
interference.
Homo sapiens,
trying to mess it up.
Or without anthropomorphizing intention.
Yeah, I mean, did nature intend to make Homo schleppians?
I don't think so.
I doubt you could convince Sam of that.
But see,
the fact is that nature made Homo schleppians.
If you could create carbon structure like entities and molecules using silicon, the bond energies would be very, very different. Yes. So the fact that you could actually break them and recreate them using carbon and hydrogen is much different if you actually use silicon and hydrogen, or silicon and any other valence.
That's why we ended up making logic gates instead. Instead of making neurons out of carbon, we made logic gates out of silicon.
But I'm saying, imagine a double helix based on not a CH, bond, but a, SiH bond. Be very different properties. Yeah. And to unravel them will take very different energy. To recreate them will take very different energy.
Yeah.
So the probabilities will be extremely different.
I mean, here's a mystery for you. How did nature come up with chlorophyll? Science still can't figure out how chlorophyll works. They know that it takes sunlight and carbon dioxide and water and makes sugar, but how the devil does chlorophyll do it? And how did chlorophyll come to exist in the first place? And chlorophyll also has to make itself. A leaf has to not only make sugar, it has to make more chlorophyll. And this is something that scientists haven't solved. And they think that some kind of quantum mechanical process is the key factor, that it can take one photon, one freaking photon, and use the energy of one photon to make one molecule of sugar. Not sucrose, glucose. Is it glucose? The 6 carbon sugar. It can make glucose out of one photon by some process that we don't really understand. If we understood it, we could make synthetic photosynthesis, synthetic leaves, which we haven't figured out how to make. So here, nature figured that one out 4 billion years ago. Phytoplankton and cytoplankton and, you know, chloroplankton, whatever hell you call it. And we still can't, this brain can't figure out how nature did it. In the 21st century, we saw.
You mean this brain haven't figured out the reverse engineering it yet?
Now, there's a good chance that somebody will figure it out in our lifetime. Probably.
Can you imagine if they figure that out, they will be able to figure out a lot more other things that was.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Or an AI enhanced brain, or a hybrid.
Yeah.
Yes, it's quite possible that an AI that can do tons and tons of intricate model-based reasoning and very fast, with thanks to NVIDIA, will be able to figure out, you know, how to synthesize or how to model the mathematics of photosynthesis. And once we have a mathematical model, we can probably figure out how to reduce it to practice without waiting for Mother Nature, because Mother Nature is very slow. It takes decades to make a tree, and a tree doesn't make that many leaves a year. You know, sugar cane only makes so much sugar in a, you know, you take a square meter of land and a whole season to make how much sugar? You know, maybe 1 bag of sugar. So it's not very efficient. And yet, if you look at the energy falling on the earth from the sun per square meter, it's huge. We're using nature uses a very tiny fraction of the sunlight falling on the earth to make food, to make plant material.
Yeah.
And we're not doing much better with solar cells. Solar cells are roughly comparable to nature of turning sunlight into usable energy.
So I think maybe the reference to vision I started with had to do also with a conversation we had about Doug Engelbart, where he had this quote that I gave some lip service to, which I don't remember the exact words were, but he said, "What do you mean I'm just a visionary? Being a visionary is hard work."
It is.
You know,
it is.
So I do think that understanding the notion of vision and how that drives imagination, creativity, and entrepreneurship, you know, product creation, social change, that's all very, very pertinent to how we envision. And each of us has that notion, but then the collective sense of vision is also, if not even more important. Because if we each only have our own sense of vision, we could be working at cross purposes and be wasting a lot of energy and time. But if we have some sort of, you know, shared vision, which I understand is very difficult to achieve, okay? But if there is any notion that we could actually share vision, all of a sudden, we could be working together.
Yeah.
The story that I like to give about that one is, I think there's, what is it? You know, the myelin sheath that, you know, erodes when there's a certain disease where that happens to really cause muscular failure. Is it muscular dystrophy?
I think it's muscular dystrophy.
Yeah. So there's a muscular dystrophy foundation that clearly, you know, is far from attaining a solution or a cure for muscular dystrophy. Now, I started telling this story way back 15 years ago. So probably this story is, in a sense, you know, not coming to its own implementation. But there was a billionaire that had a relative, probably a son or a daughter, that had muscular dystrophy. So he collected the 3 prominent researchers in MD and said, what would it take for us to cure muscular dystrophy? And they says something like, it'll take 15 to 20 years because of everything that we have to, you know, research and whatever. And he said, what if I gave you all the money you needed, but you each 3 collaborate rather than compete? In other words, you work on, you know, this aspect of the problem, you work on that aspect of the problem. And they said, maybe we have a shot to do it in, 5, 6, 7 years. Okay. So I don't know whether that actually happened, but that kind of thinking is what I'm trying to figure out whether we can do it at scale. In other words, not take so much competitive positioning on all of these things. Just say, oh, we got 15 billion people working on, that problem, and 15 billion over here working on that problem. What if we all just sort of said, hey, we're working towards the same objective, and don't view ourselves as competing, but as collaborating, or at least cooperating? That's the kind of mind shift I think that we need. But that's the kind of mind shift that requires some notion of shared vision. That's where I'm going with this.
Already 10,000 NVIDIA chips can collaborate and divide up the load.
Much easier than humans can.
These things can't do that, or haven't figured out how to do that, even though
they can share data at much higher bandwidth than these things can.
Even though the people who built the internet, who built the NVIDIA chips, can envision how they can get the machines to cooperate, humans can't figure out how to get themselves to cooperate. And that's why we're probably going to have the Darwin solution. That is, Darwin says what happens to entities which aren't very efficient. We'll be overtaken by the machine.
This is why
I invite you to think of it this way. Okay, so Bill Gates has all the money in the world. He's the philanthropist, right? He collecting a lot of donations from a lot of other people that put money in that pot. And look at what he accomplished and what he haven't done, or what he could have done for the last 20 years that he did. If you can study his model and what he failed and what it will give you a lot of answers. It's not as simple as it. You think of it like, we close our door, we have this scientific experiment that we can conduct and get things done and find things out and figure things out. It's not that simple, because a lot of conflict of interest, there's a lot of people make a living on that. There's a lot of human factor, there's stupidity, and there's politics, and there's some bullshit reason why they did what happened and all that stuff. So I invite you to study, pay attention to what Bill Gates have done, because he has given you the exact model you are trying to. If you take money as the only factor that can solve all the problem in the world, I'm telling you, it does not.
You're half right. Don't look at what Bill Gates did. Look at what Melinda Gates did. It was Melinda that redirected Bill Gates to become a philanthropist, together with Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
And Bill and Melinda, developed the foundation, and then last year they separated.
Yeah.
Which is another story in itself. Why did Melinda decide her work on this project was done? She had redirected Bill Gates, and now she didn't need to, to be his cheering squad anymore. I don't know, but all I know is,
that's
wasn't
why
for Melinda, he wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, that's why I invite you to study what Bill Gates have done and what he's going through, including his personal problem and all that stuff, because this is exactly what will happen in our double helix body.
Can you find the person who you can team up with? In music, you often have somebody who writes the music and somebody who writes the lyrics. And if you've got people who are good at, complementary aspects of a project, it's a win. And there aren't that many collaborators. The one who writes the music and one who writes the lyrics. Oh, and then the performer, because you have to have separate performers, because there are people who can write music who are not very good at performing. They're okay. They can sit at the piano and play, but they're not going to be a Jascha Heifetz or whoever, Collaborology. Typically, one person is really good at one aspect, and you need a team where everybody's good at their aspect. That's hard to do. And they don't end up fighting. Look at how many popular music bands are doing great work for 5 years and then they break up. The Beatles broke up really fast. They didn't last that long. You can ask yourself, why do these teams break up so rapidly?
I'm sure you know about this. Is the performance, the musician that on the performance stage practice 10 hours a day for at least 6 months before they can perform on stage. It's like,
and they never wrote the music. They didn't write the music. Somebody else wrote the music.
Because the person that wrote the music have no time, don't have the endurance to do that.
Or they don't have this ability
Yeah.
to run their fingers, where the guy who wrote the music is writing a note, a note, a note. He's not writing the notes at the speed at which they're being
Right.
played.
So I think of it, the person that created the seed is a scientist, and then the farmers have to plow the seed of the whole land, you know. So
Right.
again, it's
Guys at
every
Monsanto don't run the farms. They make the seeds that germinate and grow and don't die from disease.
That's right.
The farmer has to do the work of, I mean, in the Bell system, we did network planning at Bell Labs, but we didn't run the phone network.
Right. Dig the hole and dig the
So
trench.
we had to basically, here's the technology, now you attend it and make it run day after day. But, you know, the people who invented it or designed it or engineered it, they don't run it.
Yeah, so that's an idea person, that's the founder of the company, and that's the CEO.
Right.
That's the one that all the workers that execute it. And for me, for the last 40 years, I want to be in the role of all that, so I can go through all the stages myself to see different perspective, and which is very hard.
Yeah. I mean, 500,000 people were telephone operators sitting at those things and, you know, plugging in the cords until they figured out how to make a machine do that.
Yeah.
There were 1 million people working in the Bell system at its peak before automated network gear was able to replace the human operators. And they were mostly women, young women.
Another perspective is that, remember when 9/11 happened, the Twin Tower go down, our nation has a common vision to have a safer and all that guess what happened to that?
It went south.
Yeah.
Look at Rudy Giuliani, who made his reputation on 9/11. You know, the America's great mayor of New York City in 9/11, and look where he is today. He's practically in jail.
Yeah. The reason I'm using that is because that created a vision that we all together see. Everybody put out their flag in the front. We are aligned. We are this and we are this. Even you have that kind of vision that's so aligned, so consolidated, so together, and all that stuff, and we blew it.
Yeah, 20 years after 9/11, look at Rudy Giuliani today.
And I'm not saying, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we should have a vision. We should do, but I'm just telling you, it is not easy.
It's easy to corrupt because almost immediately we had Homeland Security get constructed, which then, you know, took away people's freedoms. We had the Patriot Act, you know, all of those abuses of power were justified by fear.
Yep.
There's a story I want to share with you. There's a story that happened in Los Angeles. There's an old Korean man pointed out he's on the bus. And he pointed out to the driver, there's a suitcase at the back that somebody left it. You know what happened next?
They stopped the bus and called in the police to check the bag.
Yeah. Not only that, the SWAT team come in and push the man down on the floor and handcuff him and, you know, basically treat him like a terrorist. And all the what I call the way to deal with the criminal on this old man while they check, making sure that that's what we created from the 9/11 vision.
Yeah.
Of a nation of fear, a nation of terrorists.
Yeah. Or did you muted yourself, Rubber Ducky?
I would argue that it began to expose police corruption, which already existed.
Yes.
For many decades.
Yes.
You see how complicated that is? You don't expect the vision to trigger that kind of what I call open up a can of worm that was
second and third and fourth
ready to be open.
Effects. Yes.
Yeah. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing because it's about ready to show off, and it's a good thing that the can is almost pop open, and this one just give it a reason to open it up. Okay.
Yep. Look at Trump. Trump corrupts the governmental mechanism, and now he's trying to prove that the government is corrupt.
Yeah. And the government is already corrupt in the beginning. Otherwise, you will not fall into the trap. Again, it's one of those things that, what perspective are you looking at?
It's nihilism. It's the system, and it eventually loses faith in itself and says, well, Well, Darwin's right. We're all going to die. And he's right. I mean, Darwin is right. Look, 99% of all species have gone extinct.
A small percentage plausibly has a chance to survive, but certainly not the entire species. No way.
A few birds survived the dinosaur extinction. And we don't have dinosaurs, we have birds today, but they were the same species, essentially. But the tiniest ones, the little tiny ones, which could burrow underground, get away from the atmosphere, managed to recover. That's the phoenix. The phoenix rose from the ashes.
What about the cockroaches? What about the cockroaches?
Which?
Cockroaches, spiders,
right?
Worms.
Yep. And the mammals were tiny little creatures that were burrowed underground. To this day, mammals are burrowing underground, and the ants live underground. The creatures who live underground, who burrow, were going to survive whatever the hell happens in the atmosphere.
Speaking of which, yesterday I learned a little bit more about naked mole rats. The reason they're fascinating to me is, they can survive 18 minutes without oxygen. They're adapted to conditions where they can exist and not suffer damage in low oxygen environments.
They'll survive.
Not only that, they're resistant to cancer. I discovered really interesting things about naked mole rats. Oh, thank you very much. Wow, look at that. Wow. Okay. I was just handed this excellent omelet by Gail. So
and enjoy before it get cold.
Is it made with just one egg?
It's a 3-egg omelet with lots of avocados and tomatoes and bacon and looks like chicken and cheese and
wow.
See, I only use one egg to make an omelet because enough is enough.
Yes, I get it. What was I saying?
About naked, was that?
Naked mole rats and oxygen.
They're resistant to cancer. The only species. And you know what? They found no mole rat up until a few years ago had ever exhibited any malignant cancer symptoms. However, recently they discovered 2. And those 2, it turns out, were born in captivity.
Yep. And were exposed to food provided by their captors.
And were exposed to conditions in which the oxygen content in the air was 21%.
Yeah. So they weren't stressed to develop the resistance.
In other words, this is corollary with, it seems to suggest that if these animals are stressed and live in low oxygen environments, maybe there's something there having to do with cancer and malignant cancer.
Well, what does cancer need to reproduce? Remember, cancer is an out of control rate of reproduction. Yes. And that's going to take a lot of energy. That's going to take a lot of oxygen. So if you don't have a lot of oxygen, cancer has got enough fuel. Whereas oxygen,
right.
Here's another thing about naked mole rats that I found interesting. They don't have pain nerves in their skin. They don't feel pain in their skin.
Really? Where do they feel pain?
I don't know, but that was fascinating to me. These are really interesting animals.
Yeah, they're adapted to harsh conditions. But yeah, you want to starve an out of control runaway recursion. If you have a cancer is your classic nature's example of a runaway recursion. Cancer is nature's definition of hell.
Yep.
Hell is an untamed runaway recursion. And so the word cancer really is the original word for what the theologians end up calling hell. It's just it's just a classical example of an untamed recursion, a runaway recursion. And of course, if you're a computer programmer, you know full well what an untamed recursion is: Stack Overflow, blow your stack. So we have lots of examples of out of control recursions. Chaos is an out of control recursion.
Out of control compute. In fact, let me share another joke. Software engineer encounters a genie. And genie says, I will give you $1 billion if you can spend $100 million in 30 days. But there's only 3 rules. Can't give it away, can't gamble, and you can't just throw it away. And the software engineer says, "Can I use Amazon Web Services?" There's 4 rules.
Borals. Yeah. You can spend a ton of money running runaway recursions that generate heat and no information.
Yeah. So that's funny to software engineers and DevOps people.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And, it's really hard to diagnose and correct and bridle in a runaway recursion. This is the bane of software programmers, runaway recursions.
I want to go back to a point that Sam Chan made about Kennedy and vision and that sort of thing. I do include that notion of what you're calling a leap of faith, an act of imagination with no necessarily rational path to get there. I do think that's a form of visioning. If everything were deductive, we'd have a much more constrained notion of vision.
Yep.
But vision says, I want to create that reality, and then I will ask, how do I get there? The how comes after the what. And the what will come after the why. And I think the why is the impetus, it's the energy behind the vision. And that's why when you were talking about caring, the compelling reason, that's the caring part. That's the why part. That's how I string it all together. Over.
I mean, how many people try to build those machines that run forever without energy? Forgetting what you call them now, but you know what I'm talking about.
Fusion.
Not fusion. Motors that run forever.
Yeah.
On their own energy.
Machine.
Perpetual motion.
Perpetual motion machines.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. People have envisioned perpetual motion machines since there have been machines, and they will do all kinds of experiments to try to build and test them, and even try to patent them. And most people who know the math and the physics will say that's a pipe dream.
In the thermodynamics.
Yeah, you can't, because of conservation of energy. Now, if you can convert mass to energy, then yes, you can, but it's still not perpetual. It's just until you burn up all the mass.
Yep.
I mean, the sun is a perpetual motion machine for the next 5 billion years, until it runs out of helium and runs out of all the when everything is left is iron. All that's left is iron. There's no more fusion or fission. That's the bottom of the mass to energy curve.
I want to come back and go back to the why, so use the word why that create all that. So think of why as a seed. So why do we have a vision after 9/11? If you chunk that down, the why didn't happen in a thin air. I hate to tell you that doesn't happen in a thin air. Why would they have 2 Twin Towers get struck down? Because there's something that we did that construct or created that need for them to destroy the 2 Twin Towers. Okay, so you see, why is not what I call come up from thin air. It's just there's consequences from something else. So it's not as clean as what you think a why is. Sorry to tell you that it doesn't happen.
There's another name for the Twin Towers.
I never said it was clean.
Another name for the Twin Towers is the twin temples of Mammon and Kronos. Mammon is the god of money. Kronos is the god of time. So people who don't believe in our gods, time and money and military power, Mars is the god of military. We have the twin temples of Mammon and Kronos and the temple of Mars, Pentagon. They went after our gods. They went after Mammon, Kronos, and Mars. And they took them down, or tried to take down them. They didn't take the Pentagon down. They only took down a portion of it.
Yeah.
But we don't look at the World Trade Center as the twin temples of Mammon and Kronos are true gods of capitalism. And when Alaric the Goth sacked Rome, he took down the banks and the government buildings, and he left the churches standing. He very carefully went after the banks and the government buildings, and he didn't touch the churches. He went after the gods of Rome. Power and money.
Yeah, the churches is I call it created for the need of to serve the community.
He left the church. This is very important. What
Yeah.
Alaric the Goth did is what Osama bin Laden did to New York,
Yeah,
Washington, went after our most holy gods,
yeah.
Mammon, Kronos, and Mars. And why don't Americans see that?
I understand that you didn't say that why is clean. I'm not saying that it's clean what you say. I'm just saying to you, pointing from one perspective, the why is not as independent or call out thin air from whatever it is. You have to go back to the root of where the why existed and how the why was created or the co-created or the why is come to existence.
There's a complex internetworking of dynamics, as you and Barry both understand.
Yeah.
I do.
And the key really is that if you look at everything that happened right now, you got to go back and trace the history of it and look at what I call it karma. So this is the karma, interrelated, co-created, all that.
Yep. And chaos goes after everything.
Yeah.
Everything is subject to the destructive power of chaos. Doesn't matter what your deity is. If your deity is Jesus or Yahweh or Mammon or Kronos or Mars or Venus or you name it, chaos is going to go after it.
Is
Right.
the destructive property of chaos or the destructive property of entropy?
It's the destructive property of mathematical recursion.
Okay, no, I don't mind the use of the word destructive.
Cancer will go after your body. If your body is your holy sanctuary, cancer will go after your body. It's another example of chaos. It's a runaway recursion.
If I may chunk down the word destructive, it's not destructive if you can look at it very carefully. It's just the randomness of what happened. So sort of like if you don't hold on to your steering wheel, the car will go in a different direction because you don't control it. So
right.
we only have a very desired outcome that we're looking for, right? So perspective, it's not destructive, but rather the randomness of undesirable outcome that's got created, that the cancer, right? Because we have too much food, we have too much oxygen, therefore
Maui or Canada, fire went after Maui in Canada. Fire is cancer. It's a runaway recursion. Tsunamis and floods and all this. The weather is chaos. The weather is another example of chaos, driven by the sun.
Hello, Josh. You get your medicine.
Got his mason jar there.
Yerba mate.
Is that a mason jar? It doesn't look like a mason jar.
Yeah. Yes.
It's a mason jar. Yeah, it says
a mason
mason right on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They used to make glass cutters that would cut
Wait,
mason jars.
Go back to what you're just talking about. It's so important. The runaway recursion. This is
Right.
entropy, chaos.
Right. Runaway
This
recursion. If you have a power source, in this case, the sun is the ultimate power. Because the sun is a power source, it fuels runaway recursions.
Yep. Look
And
outside your
what are the
house.
patterns?
Look outside your house. You got weeds. We got the things that don't unpresent that got created because of the sun.
Yeah. It also powers tamed recursions. Plants growing is a tamed recursion. Okay. So we have tamed recursions, which are wonderful, and then we have runaway recursions, which aren't. And there's a, balance between them. So tamed recursion grows the forest, and then a lightning strike burns it down.
You got control reversion like the bonsai.
Yeah. The sun slowly heats up the moisture and rises under the sky, and then all of a sudden it condenses and falls back down again. In a sudden release, it's like a capacitor, stores up energy slowly and then releases it all at once, and you get a flash camera. Flash camera is an intentional, instantaneous discharge of a slow buildup.
So if you want a tree to have no destructive, whatever you call it, you can move the tree inside your house.
and burn the logs in a controlled burn.
Right.
Instead of a forest fire.
All right.
And so the whole idea is you build a tree slowly by the sun and the weather, and then you burn the tree slowly to make the either fuel to eat or fuel to heat your house or whatever. But you have a controlled process versus an out of control process. And we are awash in out of control processes. The government is out of control.
And there's a ton of controlled processes too. The
Yeah.
bureaucracy of government is so controlled that it's chaotic because of the control.
Yeah, it's chaotically slow. It's very slow.
Exactly.
It's slow and chaotic. Bureaucracy is slow and chaotic. And it's tricky to build a system that's efficient and well regulated and doesn't blow itself up, or create waste products that pollute the atmosphere or poison the food or whatever. I mean, look, we have air conditioning, wonderful, except that up goes the freon, and pretty soon it destroys the upper atmosphere.
And the energy produced by the, the fuel.
Yeah, everything has its upsides and downsides, and you monetize the upside, and then you dump the downside on the poor general public, the future generations.
Yeah. Talk about dumping the downside.
Dump the downside on your grandchildren.
Yeah. So Japan is releasing the chemical, the contaminated water. So
Fukushima water. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's.
And the heavy solids will build up sediment right outside of the outfall, and the water will disperse.
Yeah.
But it's not the water. Water is this H2O.
Yeah.
It's the solids that are suspended in the water, and the heavy solids are going to fall right outside the outfall, and the lighter solids will disperse. It's like strong. Remember strontium-90 from the atmospheric tests, and it was getting into the food supply and the milk supply.
Yeah.
You end up with strontium in the milk because the cows were eating the grass that had strontium fallout.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't see that coming until it came. Then they had to stop the atmospheric.
I was wondering what happened. I thought the way that the best way to dispose it, again, based on what I know, is that you have a big farm of sunflower trees that supposedly magically would destroy that, right? It would decompose the radioactive material. Sunflower seed, sunflower plant.
How does it dispose of it?
I don't remember, but I remember if you Google it or ChatGPT, it said sunflower farm is the best way to, because it's sort of like photosynthesis. It somehow magically it will destroy it will take the radioactive material and then it will decompose it like nothing.
Well, I could see because strontium and calcium are chemically similar. So whereas the grass had calcium in it, that the
only sunflower seed, only sunflower seed, nothing else. No other plant can do that. Is what I was told.
So it's drawing up the strontium in the sunflower, but we don't eat sunflowers.
Yes.
We basically bury them when they die.
Yeah.
But the strontium is still in the sunflower. What are you going to do with the sunflower plant that's full of strontium? Take it off to a dump?
Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I'm just admiring the way that we think in terms of our own existence, of what's beneficial to us or beneficial to who or what. I think that's the most, like, any system could be actuated towards what it benefits and then do great for that thing, but not so much for the other things. Like rust is a great system for oxidizing metal, but not good for people that want to drive cars. I'm saying there's so many systems you could literally manipulate it, make a narrative, and tell a story so that it benefits one thing versus another, no matter what system it is.
Here's a good story for you. Dr. Seuss wrote a story about the Lorax. The Lorax was about an imaginary creature who was concerned about the environment.
I think we all know the story. I think everyone here is familiar. Sam, both Sams and me.
And the question was, who cares? If you care, then you're going to do something about it. But the whole idea was to get people to care.
that was the brilliance of Dr. Seuss, the Horton Hears a Who.
Exactly.
In other words, look, like I love entomology, the little, like I've been obsessed lately on YouTube with this guy that creates little tiny biospheres on purpose, and he introduces one species of like a beetle, and then he introduces the next one, and then that created this entropy, so then he creates another system of a type of spider that eats that, but then nothing eats that thing, and then there's carpenter ants and no one can get them, so then he creates scorpions and blah blah blah. He's making little like playing God basically.
Yeah, biomes.
But yeah, biomes. But it's so exciting when you start letting the biomes be infinite, because like the Penrose pattern, it just goes on to infinity, but it's only 3 shapes. But those 3 shapes are very interesting, just like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And I'm going to bring it back to our conversation yesterday, because that's why I popped on today, is the idea of creating a system that controls all of, or as much of humanity as you possibly can, such as the Catholic religion that's borrowed from many other religions, and then thus controlling time, changing the actual calendar dating and saying we're in the year 2023 and we all agree on that. So that's mind control, because control time. So I'm saying you can create any systems, just can you get the people in the biome to adopt that system? That's the question.
Creating standards that we all, creating language where we all agree with that this word means that and not that. And we haven't.
Yeah, and going back,
that was the whole point of the Tower of Babel, that you have these languages and the words don't mean the same thing to different people, and people think they're communicating and they're not. That was such an important issue that somebody wrote a story called the Tower of Babel story, just to illustrate that phenomenon.
Yeah, and that's all we're doing here every week, is we're babbling to each other to get to a better understanding of each other's definition of things and places and
Why do you
stuff.
think they called it Babylonia?
I'm just saying, Sam Hahn was making really good points earlier in the conversation about collaboration and what is possible in terms of understanding when the babble goes away.
Inter-system language established. The Forbin Project.
And inter-intentional environments that allow us to parse out the work so that we can do it together as opposed to competing.
Talk about inter-system language. Do you remember that mugshot of Donald Trump? Okay, that was in a language that everybody can read. Everybody knows that language. Never said a word. He just did that. And actually, I think it was Stanley Kubrick who popularized that first in the movies, that particular look.
How long do you think he practiced that?
Probably ever since he was indicted, and he knew he was going to have to do a mugshot. So what was he going to say, a month? How long ago was? About a month, right? And yeah, he practiced it. And he knew, for example, what the lighting configuration is. He had all those other mugshots that went the day or two before. So he knew what the lighting was going to be. And Stanley Kubrick used that exact same lighting in several of his movies. It's a well-established movie practice to get that however it's supposed to look. I can't do it. I have enough.
Like clockwork.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a rapper named Ice Cube that made an entire career out of that exact face.
No. It has names. You can look up the jargon for those names. But
I don't care about the mugshot. I just want him in jail.
but see, the point being is that the message that facial expression is sending, everybody gets that it's a message. And it's either anger or defiance, or maybe a combination of both.
Okay, so
The only thing that,
what else is it trying to convey?
Sorry?
What else is it trying to convey? We get the defiance, we get the anger. What else is it trying to convey?
Well, some people say it conveys fear. But that's abductive reasoning. That's an inference. Not an even more.
constipation too.
Well, it was clearly a practiced expression But the point is that he never said a word. He normally says a lot of words. In that photo, he never says a single word, and yet he says more with that facial expression than he'll say in a 2-hour rally.
Keep in mind also that people can only see what they want to see and what they are able to see. So
What they're able to decode.
That's right.
That's the whole point. Is what do you decode either from spoken words or demeanor or written words or works of art? Go ahead, Josh.
I just think mathematics is a good way to understand what's going on around us. And when I look at the mathematics of the stock market and I look at those numbers going up and down, there's some huge jump ups. And right before there was this huge jump up. And if you look at the mathematics of numbers of wealth created or money system, there's all this money that, you know, where is it going? What does it do? So I looked into it and it goes into $230,000 of debt for every American person moving forward that's born in or naturalized into this country. That's a lot of money.
Look at the comic strip Little Orphan Annie. There's a character in Little Orphan Annie who represents the monetary interest. Remember his name?
I'm not familiar with Little Orphan Annie.
His name is Daddy Warbucks. Daddy Warbucks. Such a transparent name. Daddy Warbucks.
Yeah. So I'm saying the system that is money works, but it has to balance out over time. And when you put the stress on the system for future generations to have to work an extra 230,000 to the state, the government, if you will, that's a lot of stress on the next future generations.
Absolutely.
It's hard to keep up. So they could do it if they, inflation and create $100 trillion economy of space rocks or something, but it's a lot of stress.
Look at how many countries have runaway inflation and basically, become dysfunctional countries because of runaway inflation. South America especially got this runaway inflation in so many countries. Central. Too.
Well, I felt the stress when I bought that Tesla car because that's a lot of money. I got to pay that off.
Did you buy? You didn't buy a Tesla car, did you?
Yeah.
You did.
Which one do you got?
Yeah. The Model Y.
I like that car. So
I'm
nice.
surprised that you bought a Tesla.
Well, one of the reasons I did is because if the world goes to shit, I can take out the batteries and use them for 10 years. And then the degradation on the batteries is supposed to be 80%. So I'm hoping they're decent batteries. That's the first thing I asked the lady when I got the keys to the car is, were these 2160 batteries or 4680s? And she said 2160. So I know I can always take it apart and at least use those batteries.
And make a solar generator, solar panels for it.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of electronics inside of it too. There's a nice there used to be a NVIDIA system inside, so I'm sure I could use that. So I figure it's a good investment that way. And if it does reach full self-driving, I don't know if you guys watched Elon's video last week of him bragging about his new version of full self-driving. Supposedly it doesn't have to be connected to the internet and it works off of AI. And it's interpreting the world around it. So if that does work, then the car can actually be a source of income if it's turned over to full self-driving robotaxi, Uber situation.
It'll work in Las Vegas. It'll work in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
A few other places.
No, actually, that's what you gotta look at what he's doing, Barry. You'll blow your mind because you like AI. They never programmed in the lanes or the lights. According to the engineers on the project, it's interpreting it through neural net learning of multiple feedback. So it can go anywhere. It doesn't have to be it can be in any country with any sign of any language.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's pretty amazing.
It'll have an easy time in Las Vegas. That's an easy market for that. It's flat. The streets are wide. There's lots of sunlight. And there's lots of people who are tourists who need transportation.
Yeah. But that would change the entire economy of the world. If cars don't have to park in parking lots, that will be a biggest game changer, I think, of real estate in the history in like the last at least 100 years.
I agree.
Like if you didn't have to park a horse in a stable or a barn, it really changes things.
You can buy a house with Tesla roof that takes sunlight as your roof, charges up your Tesla car. Other people say that the Ford trucks, the Ford electric trucks, are the best choice if you want to have a truck that can also run your house when the power goes out.
Yeah.
Yep. The bidirectional charging. I'm hoping the Cybertruck has bidirectional charging. I wish my car had bidirectional charging because those are good batteries. I mean,
Well, you can certainly pull off the DC voltage and turn it into anything to run anything. It's easy to take off DC and run it into something.
yeah.
Certainly LEDs, by definition are off of DC.
Pretty soon, the
Yeah.
whole house will be running by DC appliance.
Well,
I
certainly
hope so.
The lights run by DC. I don't know about refrigerators. Certainly in
Yeah.
the stove can
My,
run
my
by
mom
DC.
just bought a DC refrigerator. It's by Sundazer.
So it has a DC compressor.
Yep.
I guess
12
that's
volts.
right. I guess as long as the compressor is a DC motor, and your stove can run off of DC and your lights can run off of DC, both in
Washing machine, laundry, the dryer.
anything that can run off a DC motor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All you do is replace the motor with the DC motor version. That's all it is. How complicated that could be.
Well, I don't know. For example, well, I guess a quartz clock can run off of DC because it needs AC to keep time, but that's the quartz.
Yeah.
I mean, most electric clocks are synced to the 60 hertz of the power company.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The power company has to make sure that on average, the number of 60 hertz cycles per 24 hours is
55
correct.
to 65.
So that sometimes your clock will run a little fast and sometimes will run a little slow, but on average, it has to count the correct number of cycles per day so that electric clocks stay synced. And they do that. You can look up the research on how they adjust the speed to make sure that at the end of a 24-hour period, they've had the correct integer number of cycles of hertz, 60 hertz.
Or use an atomic clock or radio synced clock.
I don't know where they get they probably get the source from National Bureau of Standards, but they have to adjust their.
Someplace in Colorado.
Yeah, NIST. By the way, you can get NIST if you go to time.gov on your web browser, just time.gov, you'll get, and not only does it tell you the correct time, it'll tell you if the clock in your computer is running fast or slow.
Yeah, the drift.
By how many milliseconds. I use it at the fix-it shop. Whenever we work on clocks in the fix-it shop, I want to set the clock so I can see if it's keeping time. I just go to nist.gov and I set the clock to within 1 second of nist.gov, and then I check to see that it's not running fast or slow. Especially if it's a pendulum clock or an old-fashioned clock, not a quartz clock.
How long do you think we've been keeping time of the planets and the stars in the solar system?
Probably for 10,000 years.
Well, they found Göbekli Tepe, which is 9,000 BC.
You have to know the seasons. I mean, they did the seasons by the zodiac, but
That's almost 11,000.
yeah, but you only need to know time to the nearest week, to know when to plan. I think you're off by a week. That's not a big deal. And Aries used to be the beginning of the year, and because they didn't have the math right, the precession of the equinoxes. Eventually, that Aries ends up in like March. It's supposed to be January, and they had the precession of the equinoxes, and so Aries is no longer where it was supposed to be for planting. The slow precession of the equinoxes.
It seems like the older cultures were more accurate with timekeeping.
Well, they were accurate to the point that they only needed to know the time to the phases of the moon, to the nearest week. That was good enough for agriculture.
Do a deeper dive, Barry, because it's a lot more accurate than that.
Well, you have the diurnal, so you have the local noon, and you can keep track of local noon in a particular location, and that's probably accurate to probably 15 minutes, I would think, the rotation of the Earth. You can probably measure that too within 5, 10, 15 minutes on a daily basis.
Wasn't Galileo measuring the moons on, I think, Jupiter?
Yeah, he measured the moons on Jupiter, and they have a period of just, I think, a few days, a few Earth days. I forget exactly how many, but he couldn't see all 4 of them at once. But because each one has a different period, he determined there were 4 of them that he could see.
Yeah.
All times, at least one of them was behind Jupiter.
Yeah, I have a belief that the large megalithic structures that still exist today in certain parts of the world were actual timekeeping computers.
Well, yeah, I mean, Stonehenge was to find the day of the summer solstice. On the day of the summer solstice, the sun would rise over the heelstone. So they can measure the furthest north and south of the sun in the year, the solstice. I said them backwards. There's the the summer solstice is the extreme, and the winter solstice, and then the equinox is harder because you have to measure that the day night is 12 hours exactly, which is harder to do. But the solstice, the day of the solstice, that was the whole point of the Stonehenge. And they have New York, the New York Stonehenge. There's one day of the year where the sun rises directly over, I think it's 42nd Street. The one day where the sun rises right down 42nd Street.
Yep.
And that's
As a New Yorker.
That's the New York.
Yeah, well,
and I don't know
but then if you live on a different street, it rises at different parts. I remember the day that it rose on my street, which was Stanton Street, and all the models would come because the sun would hit them just perfect, and they would all do their photo shoots on my street.
So it depended on what angle your street was relative to true east-west. But
yeah,
I think 42nd Street, because you had the tall buildings, so you had a canyon. You had the concrete canyons, and so you had a very prominent Stonehenge in New York City.
Well, the whole entire island is a Stonehenge, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's that different streets. They're not, because they're not all in a perfectly rectangular grid. Some are at an angle.
Yeah, but most of them run from the Hudson River to the East River.
Yes, but they're not all parallel.
Yeah, they are parallel going all the way up to the Bronx.
So all the numbered streets are perfectly parallel?
Not perfectly, but they're parallel.
Parallel within a day or two of the Stonehenge.
Yeah, so 0th Street is Houston. So it's east and west. They're running east and west.
And they're true. Well, as long as they're sufficiently parallel, then they will all. But you said no, your street Stanton did not have the Stonehenge day of the same day as 42nd Street.
No, because it's at a different part of the city. I'm below 0th Street, and 42nd is 42nd Street's above.
All right. So then
So it's a different day.
So then they're angled differently. Okay.
Yeah. But it's still when the sun is going down at that, when it's going down in the west, it's shining the light over to 42nd Street, and then the next day it's probably 40th Street and down and down and down. So it's like I've been taking the picture of the sun coming up every morning for the last month, and I'm watching it at a different tree on the hilltop of the mountain coming up. So I can see when it's moving as it's getting closer to September.
I suppose if you have a house with clerestory windows, you can notice when the sun is coming in through the clerestory windows and shining on the opposite wall. And as the winter goes along, you get more light through the clerestory windows in the wintertime.
Yeah,
you could mark it just like you mark.
Yeah, I could.
your children height against the wall, you could mark the sun on your clerestory windows.
Yeah. If you build a Japanese tea house, that's one of the prerequisites for building it is the sun comes in at different times of the day and different times of the year. And if you build it properly, the way that you do the etching on the window will shine in, and you can have actual words
That light
laying on the wall and shadows. Yeah.
every day of the year.
During-
It's another letter of the next word.
Yeah. And then you do a ceremony that in ancient times was 14 days, but in modern times is 2.5 days.
Okay. But yeah, people in those days, they didn't have so many distractions. They could pay attention to where the sunlight is falling and where the stars were in the sky. And they could be much better knowledgeable about astronomy and the zodiac, because that was all they had to look at. They weren't
Well,
looking.
also their ability to cut solid rock was so different back then. And we don't have that precision that they had in ancient times.
Look how
Like
long
if-
it took us to learn how to make Damascus steel. We lost the recipe. And then
Yeah.
somebody rediscovered the recipe.
I mean, there must have been many, many cultures that got wiped out before the ones that we have recorded.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just logically, it just doesn't make any sense that there's 300,000 potential years of humanity, and we only are just what they're saying 6,000 was the beginning of
Well, so for-
intelligent language
so-
keeping.
so
It doesn't
for
make
us-
sense. It's not
For us,
logical.
the agrarian culture begins slowly about 12,000 years ago. And by about 6,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, that's when we really had to establish the way to regulate the agrarian culture, the ownership of the land, the growing of the crops, the commerce, the trading of. So the agrarian culture really is the advent of modern Western civilization. You didn't need it before that. Before
Yeah, but
that,
we always
they called
we
it
were told that we were told that the Noah's Ark was a myth, right?
yeah.
When you were
Well,
growing up in school,
It's a legend.
were you told, Sam, that Noah's Ark was a true story?
It's a myth, right?
It's a myth,
Yeah.
but there was an actual flood. Like that's
yeah.
proven through geology.
There's lots of floods. By the way, I was watching a geologist who was studying the story of the Exodus, the travel from Egypt to Canaan, and the parts of the story, and he was using geology to confirm or refute different theories of the route that they must have taken. And one of the interesting things about it is the most notorious thing is the crossing of the Red Sea, which is not really the Red Sea. It's I forget the correct name of it, but they crossed at a point where the geology works. And the thing that made it sensible, every once in a while, a bolide, which is like a meteor, hits the Earth. And if it hits the ocean, which it often does because there's more ocean than land, if a bolide hits the ocean, you get evidence of that fact because the tsunami and everything else that comes from that leaves scars on the land where it washes ashore. So there's evidence of a bolide hitting the Gulf of Aqaba. And if you work out the what happens to the tsunamis and whatnot, it explains what happened. So the bolide displaces a whole lot of water. And that means that the water that is vacated has to be sucked in from somewhere else. And then there's a resurgence on the other side of that. And they think that the event of the crossing was in conjunction with a bolide hitting the Gulf of Aqaba and draining out the Red Sea and the creek above it and exposing dry land at a wadi, which comes down and makes a delta. So you already have a shallow crossing because there's a beach where there's a wadi that washes the sand down to the beach. And they think that's where they crossed, and they lucked out because of a bolide, which also creates a wind. And there was a story of the parting of the waters and the wind, and it all is consistent with the evidence of an actual bolide, because you also see the marks where it washes up on the land and leaves marks they're called chevrons, where you can see the so-called chevrons. So he says that's the best evidence that coincides with these tales. It's just sheer luck that you happen to be at a place where you were given a chance to cross because of an act of nature that nobody could have predicted.
Well, no, it was God. He prayed to God.
Well, basically nature and God they're just synonyms for the same word. Cosmos, God, nature, Gaia, they're all synonyms. They're all pronouns. They're just pronouns. It's like president. President is a pronoun.
I'm saying one person's luck is another person's miracle. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, even the story of the plagues, where boils, which is a cutaneous anthrax, is boils. Cutaneous anthrax, the boils, they look like soot smudges. If you were going to do a movie and you wanted to show boils, you would just take some carbon soot and make a spot on the arm, and visually it looks exactly like a boil. And in fact, anthrax and anthracite are the same word. Anthracite is coal, and anthrax is the name of the disease, and it looks like coal smudge. And in the story of the plague of anthrax, the plague of boils, the instructions is go into the furnace and get a handful of soot and throw it up in the air. And it comes down as boils because the soot comes back down, lands on your skin, and you trick people into thinking they've got boils. Well, no, you just got soot. But for all you know, it's anthrax, it's boils. And they did all kinds of tricks to fool people. These are theatrical tricks to fool idiots into thinking that something was happening when it was just a parlor trick.
Or magic, whatever you
Magic.
call it.
Well, magic is a technology that is arcane and the average person doesn't know.
Yeah. Or you can call that miracle, depending on how you put it.
But why would it say go into the furnace and get a handful of soot and throw it up in the air? Why would it say that? Because that's how you make the illusion of boils on your skin, cutaneous anthrax. But how many people know enough to appreciate that's just a parlor trick?
That was my whole point. If I was to debate Sam on the Vatican, is it's one giant parlor trick.
Well, humans have been doing. I mean, politics is a parlor trick too.
Yeah,
There's a
believing in a
cartoon.
narrative.
There's a cartoon in Peanuts cartoon where one of the female characters, I think it's Marcy, says, why do fairy tales always begin with once upon a time? And Charlie Brown says, no, sometimes they begin with, if I'm elected, I promise to. It's a fairy tale, right?
Yeah, I'm just saying most magic is pulled off by a collusion that you're unaware of.
Yeah.
So that's most magic tricks are, I assume that we're all coming in even with no knowledge of what the magician's going to do. But if
Right.
there's a couple people that have that knowledge and help to manipulate the situation,
Right.
then it looks like magic. Like,
Right.
I don't know, do you guys do any magic tricks or?
I used to as a
Yeah,
kid.
of course. Yeah, it's just so fun.
Yeah, the best ones are when,
fools people. Yeah.
yeah, the best one is when you have someone in on the trick and nobody else knows except you and that other person that they're the ones in on the trick.
And the other person's a shill.
And that shill is your key to getting information that you couldn't have gotten otherwise. Thus, it looks like magic.
The science.
The simplest one is this one here. Like, you know,
Oh yeah,
like,
right. The thumb is a nose.
ugh.
Take off your
Whoa.
nose. Remember, they take off your nose and it's actually your thumb. That's a
I
classic.
can tell you practiced that one, Sam.
I was trying to remember that it's been a long time playing with my grandson. Yeah.
Penn and Teller
Yeah,
were the consultants on a exhibit at the Science Museum. We had an exhibit at the Science Museum on magic, and Penn and Teller were the consultants. And so you'd go into the room and you'd see the magic trick face on. Then you could go behind it and see the engineering. And everyone
Right.
had very clever engineering that, unless you're a really good engineer, you would never have thought of. And when you go behind and you see how it's done, you go, that is very clever engineering.
Yeah.
And that's what
I
I
mean-
think the Catholic Church did. Clever engineering.
Exactly.
There's a lot of
This-
YouTube now exposing the magic, how it's being done nowadays. Used to
yeah.
be there's a taboo, but now everything is everything
And
is,
you're not allowed to call it magic. You have to call it illusion.
yeah,
So
illusion.
doing a magic show on television, you have to call it an illusion, which is true. And you're not allowed to call it magic because that's truth in advertising or something like that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you have illusionists, and of course they don't tell you how the illusion is done. But on the Penn and Teller show on the cable channel, the idea is that these amateur magicians come in and then Penn and Teller try to figure out how it's done. They don't
Right.
reveal it to the audience, but if Penn and Teller can figure out how it's done, and then they tell the amateur magician how they think they did it, then Penn and Teller win. And if they can't figure it out, then the amateur wins.
Right. Yeah. I love that show. It's a good
And
one.
every once in a while, they'll get a trick that's so well done that Penn and Teller can't figure out how they did it.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting as a magician or any kind of discipline, there's multiple ways to the outcome.
Exactly. And that's the trick that the winners know that there's 3 ways it can be done, and Penn and Teller only get to guess one of them. And it's so there's a chance that they'll guess the wrong way. And if the guy does it the hard way, the unobvious way, then they're likely to win. And they do.
And I think that's the key to collaboration is if you have multiple ways to get something done, how many people want to do the way that they all agree upon, even though if someone knows there's a better way or a different way, they go, you know what, I'm going to do it your way just to collaborate with you.
My challenge is if I figure out how to do something, it's hard, but I can find a way to do it. Then I want other people to learn to do it that way, so I don't have to do it for them every time. And
Right, but they're
problem
going
is,
to do it.
yeah, my
Yeah,
problem is
go
I
ahead.
can't find people who are interested in doing the trick, which is not a trick, it's a piece of technology, and it's a useful, necessary piece of technology, but it's too friggin' hard to learn to do.
You know why? You know why? That's because you only pick the difficult one to do. That's the thing that you do. You don't pick an easy one.
Well, it's the hybrid Zoom meetings, the hybrid meetings where people are present in the room and people are on Zoom at home, and you want everybody to be able to see and hear everybody else.
multiple operating system, multiple hardware, multiple position, multiple everything. So it's like, okay,
And you have a whole bunch of components all working in concert
yeah,
to make the whole show work. And I can't, it's like a one-man band. I can't run all the parts.
yeah. The problem
other
with a
people
one-man
run
band
the-
is that you are having a symphony going on that
Right.
everybody need to play their instrument correctly. And
Exactly.
that's difficult.
And I don't have everybody present who can play one of the instruments.
That's
and so
right.
if I can play all the instruments, I can't play them simultaneously.
That's right. Exactly right. The symphony. Okay. Well, time to go, my friend.
Oh yeah, it's after 1 o'clock.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the entertainment.
Is there anything
Thank you, Sam, for
to say?
letting me share. I didn't want to debate you. I just wanted to share my point of view. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
See the chat. Okay.